Welcome, everyone, to episode 14 of Coach by Triple Dart. I'm Glenn Bona, your host and Associate Director of Organic Growth here at Triple Dart. And like all of you, I am ready for today's session. Before we jump in, some housekeeping for anyone new to the series. I'm going to be sharing my screen here. So I just want to talk about, the series that we have and also the company behind it. So Triple Dart is a B2B SaaS growth marketing agency focused on both paid and organic channels. Since launching in 2021, we've grown to a team of 70 plus marketers across India, Singapore, and the US, partnering with brands like Airbase, Freshworks, and ClickUp. You can see a bunch of other logos here to mainly drive predictable pipeline for everybody. Everybody loves that predictable pipeline, right? So if you're curious about how we can help scale your business to today's modern landscape, don't hesitate to get in touch with me or apply directly to our website, tripledart.com. Moving on, Coach by Triple Dart is our way of giving back to the marketing and growth community. We bring in experts, operators, and practitioners who are actually in the trenches. They're testing, they're iterating, and driving real business outcomes. The goal here isn't to present theory, it's insight based off of real world experiences and examples that you can take back to your team tomorrow. And as you can see here, we've had a chance to host some incredible guests across SEO, demand gen, and growth. Now, I'm super excited about today's guest. George Coudounaris is the co-host of the B2B Playbook and a demand gen leader who has helped over 400 B2B teams build scalable pipeline systems. What makes George's work stand out is how he simplifies what is usually a very messy process. Because the reality is most demand gen strategies don't fail because of bad tactics, they fail because of bad sequencing. Content goes out before the ICP is defined, ads run before trust is built, sales, they get leads before they're actually ready. And that's exactly the gap that George focuses on solving. Through his 5Bs framework, he helps teams move from just doing a bunch of marketing stuff to actually running a system, one that actually aligns different teams like sales, customer success, and marketing to generate that real pipeline that we're all after. So if you've ever felt like demand gen just feels really busy, but you're not creating the impact or it's not really feeling effective, or you're just generating a bunch of activity and no revenue, or your teams are just working really hard, but they're just disjointed and not in sync. Well, this session is going to be incredibly relevant for you. So open up another Google Doc and get ready. This one's going to be incredibly tactical. George, welcome to Coach by Triple Dart. We're excited to have you on.
Glenn, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for inviting me. Some great names on that list. Lachey, who you had before, I've had her on the B2B Playbook podcast. She's unreal. She's fantastic. So I'm in good
Fantastic.
company. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
All right. You want me to kick off and share my screen?
let's do it.
Okay. Can you see that all right?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, yes. Thank you again for having me. Thank you, Glenn. Very excited to be here. As I said, from the B2B Playbook, we have our own demand generation agency, but probably what we're known best for is our podcast and really free education resources, the B2B Playbook, which also has some training in it as well. We've had over 400 companies through those different programs. We've had over 220 episodes, and a lot of it is stress testing our own 5Bs framework for demand generation. I do that mostly with my business partner, Kevin, here. You can see we're both little bobbleheads. The designer's actually been quite kind to me here. Kevin is a lot taller than me in real life, and here we look at a similar height, which is very, very nice. But I wasn't always a happy B2B marketer strategist. about 7 years ago, I was pretty stressed out. I was mostly a performance marketer. And I remember at the time I was working with a rapidly growing finance company. And my one objective for them was to help them get leads. That's what I was basically brought in to help them do. And as a performance marketer, I went in and I did what we knew best. We launched our ads on Google, Microsoft, Meta, and this is what kind of ended up happening. In month one, I remember the call with the client. They said, George, you boys are killing it. This is fantastic. We're going to smash our lead target this month. Then month two hit, and he said, George, budget has doubled this month. This is awesome. Keep going. Then month three came about, and he said, George, we're getting too many leads for the sales team. We're hiring more. I thought, wow, this is going really well. And then month four, George, we just ran the numbers. Not enough of these leads are converting. We're going to need more leads. Spend this budget. And then month five, George, Google Ads isn't profitable. We're losing money. This is unsustainable. And month six, let's just say that was trouble. It led to a lot of sleepless nights. I was checking and optimizing campaigns on weekends. I felt really frustrated, really defeated. And after speaking to so many other B2B marketers who are rolling out what we think is this older demand generation playbook, we really knew it was broken. So if you have felt yourself in that same situation, if you've been burning budget, if you're chasing leads that don't close, if sales tell you that your leads are crap and you're under pressure to do more with less, then hopefully you'll find some of what we're about to share a little bit interesting. So there's a reason that I think sales teams can be so mean to us marketers. And I think it's because the lead factory that traditional demand generation encourages is basically broken. So marketing is incentivized very often to get as many leads as possible, often MQLs. And there's not a lot of thought as to the quality. Yes, we're encouraged to get quality, but the pressure comes on and often it becomes a volume game. Sales are incentivized to close deals and they're forced to sift through whatever we send them. And the result ends up being a total misalignment between the two of our teams. Most of our leads basically miss the mark. You can see that we're falling, off the panel here into the abyss, and very few turn into genuine opportunities for sales. And it kind of ends up being like a leaky bucket, a broken conveyor belt, whatever it is that you want to call it. No matter how much you pour in, it never really fills up. And I'm going to show, for marketers often what the leaky bucket looks like in practice. So looking at my terrible scribbles on the screen, here's the situation that we see time and time again. Marketing is handed a lead target for the next quarter or two. In response, we do the following. We slap together an ebook as fast as possible or some kind of lead magnet, normally titled, whatever your industry trends are, 2026, 2027. This is then blasted to your audience on whatever platforms you hang out on. It could be LinkedIn, it could be Meta, or it's passed on through content syndication. And in exchange for the ebook, the prospect is forced to hand over their email address, their job title, their passport details, all those things that we ask for. At this point, marketing hits its MQL and lead KPIs. But to be honest, this is where a lot of it actually starts to break down. These leads are passed on to sales. Sales then try to make contact with them through some kind of sequence, calling, emailing, messaging on LinkedIn. If they're lucky enough to make contact with the prospect often has no idea who the brand is and barely remembers the report they've downloaded. I'm sure you've spoken to sales if you're a marketer and you've heard that story. And the reason is they just weren't ready to buy. And sales become so frustrated that they're wasting their time with these leads that they stop trusting what marketing sends them and they go and prospect more on their own. And that's where we start to see more of that divergence between sales and marketing. And I'm sure most, if not all, B2B marketers have been through this emotional roller coaster. And I think it's this lead gen strategy that is part of the most traditional demand generation playbooks that needs to start going away, particularly in 2026. So what does bad demand generation look like? Well, it comes with two key challenges that I just spoke about. The first is that lead generation isn't really a sustainable way for the business for acquiring new customers. And that just means that the sheer cost involved of running ads to collect leads and the cost and time it takes for sales to get these leads, it's often just not financially viable for the business. And the second big challenge is if we're just running direct response ads and we're trying to capture those in market looking to buy right now on platforms like Google Ads, G2, wherever it is that your lower funnel platforms are, that often becomes too expensive to scale and never scales as much as we want it to. So let me show you why, and we're just going to start by looking at challenge one, why lead generation becomes unsustainable. So lead generation can be an unsustainable way for acquiring new customers because when companies calculate their cost per lead or cost per acquisition, they often do the following. They often take the amount of ad spend and divide it by the number of leads or clients won. It's very simplistic. And I think that approach is far too simple. It doesn't take into account the much bigger hidden costs associated with acquiring those customers. It ignores the cost of the marketing salaries, the tools, the tech that is needed to get those leads. But it also ignores, I think, the bigger one, which is the expensive sales and the time it takes for them to sift through all these different leads that we're sending them, looking for that needle in the haystack that is ready to buy right now. And so I encourage everyone who is taking this lead generation approach to take the time to do this calculation to see, is lead generation really working for your business? Is it commercially viable? It might be. And if it is, fantastic, play on. But the odds are you probably have quite a low lead to win rate. And those leads that you're generating are often not ready to buy and have very little brand awareness. And it can just be a very expensive way to go to market to fill the funnel like this. The second issue is demand capture does not really scale profitably. So even if lead gen was working, for some reason, basically every forecast I've seen estimates that a company's cost per lead and cost per acquisition is going to come down over time. Now, I'm sure if you're tuning into this and you're a marketer, you've all seen those projections where companies just assume that your cost to acquire a customer are going to go down over time. That is very often not the case, especially for anyone that has worked with an emerging brand. As your brand gets larger, yes, and people become have a stronger affinity with your brand, absolutely. Eventually it will. But more often than not, in a lot of circumstances, it doesn't go down the way we think it will. And there's several reasons for that. The first is each year across pretty much all platforms, your cost to play in those platforms gets more expensive. So in Google Ads, for example, cost per click becomes more and more expensive each year as competition increases. Secondly, a good performance marketer, and I'm sure there's many in this room as well, but a good performance marketer will often start by targeting high intent, longer tail searches that match exactly what your company offers. So, for example, if you're a car finance company and you specialize in finance for small businesses, then you're going to try and capture traffic from people searching for car finance for small businesses. This traffic often has less competition, it's more highly relevant, so it tends to be more profitable. But there's only so many people out there searching for car finance for small businesses. So once you've captured that demand out there, you need to scale to try and get more leads. So you start to target more generic traffic, like people searching for just car finance alone. Yes, this has more volume, but it ends up becoming more expensive because there's more competition. It also tends to have lower conversion rates because it's not matched as well to what you offer. So what we see is cost per click and cost per acquisition actually continues to rise as we scale, if all we're really doing is trying to capture existing search demand out there. So what does a more modern approach to demand generation look like? Well, a modern approach really requires us to go beyond marketing, just getting leads at all costs. It's actually a lot about doing the marketing fundamentals with a more modern spin. And some of these fundamentals, I think, have been lost in the last 10 or 15 years. And maybe some of the SaaS world is to blame for that. But I want to start by looking at the 95-5 rule. So what you can see here is research from the B2B Institute, which is LinkedIn's own think tank, that shows at any given time, only 5% of your target market is actually ready to buy right now. The other 95%, they actually don't even know that they need you, or they're not in market. They're not looking to buy right now. Maybe they already have a contract with a competitor of yours, but they're not looking right now. And I think this is something that we forget as B2B marketers. But if we just stopped to think about how often our own companies purchase things, you'll realize that you're also often not that in market. For example, if I just sign a 2-year deal with HubSpot as my CRM, it's pretty unlikely I'll be in market shopping around for another CRM until 3 or 4 months before my contract expires with HubSpot. It's just not that likely that it would be so bad that I would break my contract. And if all your activities are just focused on that 5% who are ready to buy right now, well, guess what? So are your competition. So every year, you and the competition are just trying to take a larger slice of the same size pie. And that's why it's so hard to scale, focusing on in market buyers right now alone. The big opportunity is to reach the out of market 95% of the market. And the goal there is to build relationships with them. So when they finally come into market, they come straight to you instead of the competition. Another piece of research that I want to draw your attention to is some from Bain, which shows that when buyers are in market on day one of their search, what they'll do is actually go and make a short list of potential vendors. And 80% of those will not purchase from you unless they've heard about you before coming into market. And why is that the case? Why don't people buy from you unless they've heard of you before they start making that decision? Well, you've probably heard that saying that nobody got fired for hiring IBM. And what that means in B2B is when we're asking a business to buy from us instead of, using the big trusted incumbent like IBM, we're actually asking people to take a risk. So if the implementation goes badly, that can actually affect someone's career. It's much safer to just go with the big brand like IBM because you're less likely to be blamed if it goes wrong. That's why it's so incredibly important to build trust before someone is looking to buy and not just try and get them at that last moment when they're looking to buy. So that means that our job as marketers means that we need to help our company make that short list that people make when they go and look for different vendors. And to do that, we really need to build trust. But all the lead generation activities and demand capture activities that companies are currently running as part of the more traditional demand gen playbook are to go after those who are in market right now. And often by then, it's just too late. So we need to market to those who are not yet ready to buy and to be okay with that as an investment. So how do you actually do that? That's a lot of what our own 5Bs framework is all about. So if chasing leads could be a bit of a dead end for your business and capturing demand alone doesn't scale, what does modern demand generation actually look like? Well, as demand generation marketers, I think we need to guide our best fit market through the entire buying journey. Not just focus on those who are ready to buy right now, but as I stressed on the slide before, that 95% who are not currently looking to buy yet. And modern demand generation has two jobs running simultaneously. The first is shaping future demand, which is building trust and relationships with that 95% who aren't yet ready to buy. So when they do come into market, you're already on the short list. And the second is, again, capturing that existing demand. So that 5% who are actively looking right now, we are trying to get them as much as possible and capture that demand. Now, most teams are only really doing that second job, and they're not doing it as well as they could because often they skipped speaking to 95% of the market. So this here is the 5 stages of awareness. It's a nice framework that we like using. It's from Eugene Schwartz. Basically, the 95% of the market are generally unaware, problem aware, maybe solution aware, and those in market tend to be product aware and most aware. So the 5Bs framework is a system that we've developed, and it can help you really go through a sequential process to make sure you are both reaching those future buyers and building relationships of trust with them and capturing existing ones too. It acts more of a flywheel than a funnel. And the reason for that is that a funnel empties, but a flywheel accelerates. So each time you go through the process, you become more efficient and better than the last. The stages are sequential on purpose. It's by design. You've got to do your strategy piece first. You've got to do your content and get the pieces in place to build relationships before you have really good distribution. You've got to do distribution before optimization. You can't really skip steps without paying for it later. And this 5Bs framework is what we share in our podcast very regularly. And it came about in our response to the frustration that there was just so much advice out there. So much was very heavily tactical, but there just wasn't a lot of guidance on what to do and when. So I'm just going to run you through at a high level what each of the 5Bs are. The first is be ready. And this is the foundational strategy piece that companies really need to have in place. And it's about ensuring that you've identified and you're aligned on your best markets to penetrate. And you've done all the hard work to understand them as much as possible. And of course, in response to that, that you've positioned your company, your products, and your pricing to match. So that is a non-negotiable fundamental stage that we see a lot of businesses say they're going to figure out eventually and say, we'll let the data guide us. But in fact, it needs to be the other way. There needs to be a real intention to look at which market you're penetrating and to make sure you have the foundations in place to really serve that market as well as possible. The second stage in our 5Bs framework is what we call be helpful. And this is about building relationships of trust at scale before buyers enter the market. And the goal is to be, I think, one of the most useful voices in your category and for the market to really associate the pains that they experience with your brand as the solution. The third stage in our 5Bs framework is what we call be seen. Be seen because it's all about making sure people actually see you. There's no point in doing be ready, be helpful if no one sees anything that you're creating. And this is all about building a distribution and promotion engine so your ideal customers see, like, and trust your brand. The fourth stage is what we call be better. And this is about closing the loop across sales and customer success and using data both internally and from your market to optimize your marketing, your sales, and your product. And then finally, be the best. This is about creating really compounding advantages that competitors can't easily replicate. So again, you want to work through it in order. Be ready first, then be helpful, then be seen. They're the three really core ones that you want to focus on. And then once you have them down, move on to be better and eventually be the best. Okay, going deeper into be ready. Again, this is this strategic foundational piece that so many miss and don't do well enough. And I think it's the stage that determines actually whether everything else afterwards works. So before you create a single piece of content or you write an ad, there's really, I think, 6 key things that a lot of teams skip. And the first is market selection. So before you build your ICP, your ideal customer profile, you need to answer a more fundamental question, which is which segments are really worth pursuing? And there's a bunch of different ways that you could do that. I think a great way to do that, if you do have a good existing customer base, is to run some 80-20 analysis on your customer base to see which segments generate the most revenue, convert the fastest, tend to renew and expand, which are really good loyal users, which are the most profitable. There's always a few segments that tend to stand out as driving the most value. You want to go really deep on those. Trying to serve everyone equally really dilutes your message and it drains your resources too. You end up being a jack of all trades and master of none, and then people don't really think of you when the time is right. The second and third ones would be building your ideal customer profile with real precision. So not just a job title and a company size, but you really want to speak to your market directly and find out the behaviors, the pressures, the priorities that make someone a great fit. And then after that, you want to map their category entry points as well. So what were the specific situations and triggers that cause someone to go looking for a solution like yours? So category entry points are really, really important. It's those moments where people have something happen to them and they go, oh, I really need your solution. And I think the best way to find those is by directly speaking to customers. If you're a marketer, setting up customer interviews is a great way to do that. If you find it tough to get access to customers directly because sales are safeguarding that relationship, maybe you can get them to help you source that information too. So you need to move beyond just looking at an ICP of, head of marketing, a SaaS company, but you want to think about, a head of marketing who just came out of a board meeting where the CEO said, pipeline is half of what it needs to be. And I'm not sure if anyone out here follows Adam Holmgren from Fibler, but he does an awesome job with his ads of really calling out the moments that a lot of marketers experience, particularly around creating pipeline reports upwards to the CEO or to leadership. And he wants you to associate that fear around, oh, how can we show we actually made an impact with his attribution tool, Fibler. Go and check it out. He does a really great job at it. The fourth one is one that I think will be new to pretty much everyone here, and it's called cataloging. And I learned this from a 2 times CRO, 7 times head of sales, Adam Manderovich, who we have collaborated with on a number of things. And cataloging is something I think that, a lot of teams haven't really heard of, but it changes a lot. To understand it, I need to take you back, 20, 30 years ago. BDMs, business development people, they had a good territory. They knew their accounts. They knew who was 6 months from renewal. They knew who had budget approved. They knew who was quietly frustrated with their current vendor. They knew what it would take to win each account. They knew the internal champion, the objections, the timing window. They were constantly cataloging, but they just didn't call it that. It was just what they did. But the model has since changed with predictable revenue coming in, and instead it's become very much a volume game and trying to find people who are ready to take a meeting right now. But as we've identified beforehand, people won't take that meeting unless they are in market right now. And there's a good chance that a lot of people that your sales folks are talking to that are actually out of market. But just because they're out of market, it doesn't mean they're worth having a one-to-one conversation with and understanding who their current vendor is, what they like, what they don't like, when their contract ends, what they pay, and do they have permission to circle back to them. But sales don't do that so much anymore. Or if they are doing it, they're not putting it in a database that's making it to us as a marketing department. And I think ultimately that's why we are, as marketers, often getting stitched up with this task of trying to identify who has intent and is ready to buy right now. And to be honest, the data shows that we're not great at that. We're not very good at being able to work out, just because someone is on our pricing page, it doesn't mean that they're looking to buy from us right now. And I think that's probably, it shows in the misalignment between marketing and sales and the two teams not getting along. Because if we were able to send sales a whole lot of hot leads that are in market, well, then we'd be best friends, but we're not. So sales know that our guess is wrong. They're not collecting that information anymore, but basically they need to go back to doing it. And what we've worked with Adam Manderovich to do is to start to bring this back across a lot of sales teams where they're one-to-one speaking to every person in their market, even before they hit their pipeline, not to sell to them, but just to understand, again, who their current vendor is, what they like, what they don't like, when their contract expires, and do they have permission to circle back. You could call it a market development officer, you can call it whatever you want, but that information is absolutely key and is absolute gold for the marketing department too. I'll get into that a little bit more later on, but cataloging is a really, really key piece that just is a fire hose between the market, what's important to them, and your business. The fifth step is positioning and messaging. So once you have your market selection, you've identified who your ideal customers are, their category entry points, you've started cataloging them to understand them on a one-to-one level. You can now start to build your positioning that really differentiates yourself from the rest of the market. And it should be specific enough that the right buyer reads it and thinks, yeah, that's exactly my situation. These people get me. They're the best fit for me. And then finally, aligning sales, marketing, and customer success. If the whole go-to-market team isn't really aligned on who you're going after and what winning looks like, you're at a significant disadvantage and things are going to be far less efficient. So there needs to be systems to pass information between departments, particularly from sales, again, who are on the front line, to marketing, and of course from customer success, who are face to face with the customer, back to marketing and back to sales as well. Going deeper into Be Helpful. So again, Be Ready was all that foundational stuff that sounds really simple, but can be harder to execute because there's just a lot of brute force and a lot of time into it. But once you have that down, stage 2 is what we call Be Helpful. And that's where you start building relationships at scale before, anyone's raised their hand saying, hey, I definitely want to be a customer of yours. So your buyers are out there right now dealing with problems. If you become part of their mental shortlist before they ever speak to sales. We like to use the 5 stages of awareness as a content planning tool. It's not really for segmentation, but it's just to make sure you have something useful for buyers at every stage. What we find is most teams just create content for stages 4 and 5 of awareness, which is like product aware and most aware. But that means that they're not speaking to 80% of their market still in stages 1 to 3. And probably a big issue we see with companies that do create, what we might traditionally call top of funnel content is it can often be content for its own sake. And I think that this content works best when your product or service is the logical conclusion to that content, even if you're not explicitly saying it at that point in time. So for us, we of course use this system ourselves for the B2B Playbook. We record 1 podcast episode per week. That becomes a YouTube video, an extended article, a newsletter, 12 LinkedIn posts, 8 to 10 short clips. It's a very resource efficient way to get a lot of content. And we always make sure that we're mapping our content to each of these stages of awareness, because then we know that we're able to speak to buyers at different stages. And again, we don't know exactly where people are at these different stages, but we're able to put out content and be helpful and associate the pains that they have with the solutions that we provide at each stage. So the goal is to really be the most useful voice in your category. Do that as much as possible. And if you use those insights that we created in Be Ready, your content will solve real problems. I think that there's really no substitute, again, for talking to customers directly and finding out what issues they're facing, and then using that as the basis of your helpful content. If you go and use, AI interfaces to help you create that, it just might not be as relevant or as tailored as you really need it to be. And also, that's something that all your competitors can do as well and are probably doing. You're going to find out the real juicy insights, the things that really make people feel seen by speaking to them directly. The 3rd stage is what we call Be Seen. And again, this is all about distribution and promotion. And this is really where you pour fuel on the fire that you've already built in stages 1 and 2. Probably one of the bigger mistakes that we see is teams often go straight to this Be Seen stage without doing the Be Ready or Be Helpful work. Often it comes because companies just want to say, oh, we want to test and learn. And you end up testing and learning by using a lot of ad budget, basically. But if you did the hard work in stages 1 and 2, you would have something that that works. And then advertising is just a way to pour fuel on a fire that is already there. So once you have those foundations in place, again, paid media becomes more of a multiplier. It becomes less of a gamble. And we like to think of distribution at really 3 levels. You've got 1 to many, 1 to few, and 1 to 1. 1 to many looks like, using paid advertising, organic social, podcasts, newsletter. 1 to few might be webinars or events or roundtables, and 1 to 1 is direct outreach. I think you need all 3 running at the same time. Generally, I think marketing is good at the 1 to many and 1 to few. and sales tends to be better at one-to-one. I don't know a lot of marketers that love getting on the phones and doing direct outreach to prospects. Again, you want to select channels and places that both in-market and future buyers are hanging out in. And when it comes to distribution, it's important to have always on campaigns, not just operating in bursts alone. So if we think about, again, the 95-5 rule, we need to make sure people remember us. So when they come into market, they think of us first. We get on that short list. And if we're just doing short campaign bursts, there's a good chance that we're actually going to miss those people at the right time. So we need to have an always on engine. That's really, really important. I'm going to share some. Oh, and sorry, just before I go to this as well, again, this is what our own content repurposing system looks like that fuels this whole thing for our business. We've helped a lot of companies set up a similar repurposing engine too. It starts with the pillar pieces of content, and then we have a whole lot of workflows to turn it into all the content that we need for the month in a very short amount of time. I think there's a real benefit to having video as your pillar piece of content as well. It is a little bit harder to replicate. It's a little bit harder to replicate, I think, with AI currently. I know that's changing rapidly, but I think it captures your unique, authentic voice, which is really, really important. And again, harder to replicate. Going into a few hacks that you might want to call them for be seen. Probably the first one is thought leadership posts. I'm sure a lot of people here have experimented with them. If your audience is on LinkedIn, thought leadership posts are phenomenal. They have extremely high engagement rates. We're seeing engagement rates of 8 to 15% from our thought leadership posts. And one cool thing that we're doing is we go back through and we make sure that every organic post that ends up becoming a thought leadership post actually has a call to action in it. And if we think back to the 5 stages of awareness, stages 1 to 3, we tend to link to some kind of helpful piece of content, or sometimes we'll even link to another LinkedIn post. And stages 4 to 5, because that's more demand capture, we direct people with a more direct call to action to book a meeting, book a demo, whatever it is, whatever it might be. Now, by linking people to that, it's a great way to direct people to the resources that you want them to see. But we've also found that there's a very high click-through rate if you link to other LinkedIn posts. So you're kind of daisy chaining your post. So in this example, we have a thought leadership post, which then at the end says, check out these other LinkedIn posts that'll help, explain this idea further. And we find when you mention LinkedIn in the actual sentence, you get a much higher click-through rate than if you didn't mention LinkedIn at all. Reason being is people probably just want to stay on the platform, or they're much happy to stay on the platform. And that's really cool. You can see this reporting within LinkedIn ads as well as landing page views. But you pay basically for one impression, and then people start hopping around between your different LinkedIn posts, which is great because they're getting deeper into your brand. They're getting deep into your ideas, your way of thinking. The other hack, which is not LinkedIn related, but something else and something that we use too, is using your podcast or content collaboration as a play for account-based marketing. So instead of pitching a target account cold, invite the key decision maker to be a guest on your podcast or a webinar. It's unbelievable how many senior leaders will say yes to a podcast who would have said no to a sales pitch. It creates a genuine relationship building moment and really a natural reason to follow up. And I think it's still one of the really strong one-to-one ABM plays available right now. Probably the fourth thing to mention is just self-reported attribution. Again, it's not really a hack. It's something that should be common sense, but so much of our attribution or so much of our activity isn't directly attributable within our CRMs. And so just simply asking people, how did you feel? That's where you're going to start to see people mention events, podcast, your YouTube videos, whatever it is. If we didn't ask that question, we would have canceled our podcast a long, long time ago because no one's last clicking from a podcast and signing up for one of our services. So very important that you capture that information. Just giving you an example of be seen working in practice. And this is a LinkedIn ads example. And it's one of my favorite case studies because we work with a friend of the show called Sam Dunning. Sam runs Breaking B2B. It's an SEO and AEO agency. And when we started working with Sam, he had a pretty strong organic presence and SEO strategy, but his organic reach was declining like everyone else's over the last 18 months. So we worked with him to really map his content to the 5 stages of awareness to make sure he filled any gaps and answer questions that buyers have at each stage of the journey. And we'd get him to do an organic post about it. And then we'd run it as thought leader ads. Now, just like I showed you before, every post had a call to action in it. Again, generally for stages 1 to 3 of awareness, we'd link to a helpful piece of content like his 90-day to SEO revenue guide, and stages 4 to 5, it was more around booking a call with him. And Sam had like 8 to 15% engagement rates on his organic posts, which is super strong. We also laid on company page ads and thought leadership ads with other notable people in the industry like Adam Robinson and Adam Holmgren. And what was really cool about this was they were posting about the amazing work that Sam was doing for them. And so then we would take their posts and boost those as thought leadership ads. And to date, they're still some of the strongest drivers of performance. So if you have a customer out there that's a raving fan, if you can get them to post on LinkedIn, give them a reason to do that, send them an award, have some sort of arrangement with them, get them to do it. It's a huge help because you have third-party validation coming from them to your market, and it can be so much deeper and build trust so much faster than if it was just coming from you. And in 20 or so months, Sam grew from a 50K a month to a 200K a month agency in just 20 months. And LinkedIn was a very, very core part of that strategy. And he did it with a tiny budget of it was like £1,500 a month or so. It only worked because Sam had done the hard work, the be ready, the be helpful work. He knew his ICP, his content was genuinely helpful. Be Seen just made sure that the right people saw it. So it's under the hack scene, the hack section, but it's not really a hack. It's just what happens when distribution is really put on top of a really solid foundation. Now, just conscious of time here, I'll move through these a little bit faster. Be better. One key part of this is, of course, tracking the success of your demand generation programs. And a lot of great programs get canceled because marketers don't really know how to show they're on the right track. And so we always like to look for those leading indicators to say, yes, you're on the right track. And then those lagging indicators to look back and say, yeah, we truly made a difference. I think we're better at reporting on the lagging indicators, but marketers generally were not so good at convincing people that the leading indicators are really important. So some of those important ones might be looking at, engagement from your ICP accounts. Are you getting more brand traffic? Are you capturing more of a share of the search for your category? Are you getting more traffic from your ICP? Are you starting to see more pipeline that's influenced from marketing? And then, of course, self-reported attribution is really, really helpful. Also in Be Better is where we really like to introduce revenue alignment architecture. And that's the system that closes the feedback loop between marketing, sales, and customer success. So all 3 teams operate really from the same truth about the market. And without it, I think probably the status quo is what happens to a lot of teams. Sales insights never reach your content team. CS conversations never really reach the marketing team to update the targeting at all. And everyone's just kind of guessing independently. So you need to have structured systems to pass information around between departments. That's something that we don't really have a lot of time to get into today, and something that is the topic of what we call closed circuit selling. But when these systems work together, demand generation just becomes turbocharged because it doesn't just become a marketing problem, but it becomes a an organization-wide system where everyone is on the same team working together. Probably a simple example of just how this mindset has changed things. We worked with an organization recently, and one of their salespeople started cataloging the market, again, having conversations with the market one to one, even before their pipeline. And they're in property technology. And they found that there was a prospect that their marketing team had spent $5,000 to $10,000 of marketing budget on, trying to chase them, trying to book them in, to book a demo. But once this salesperson got a hold of them in a cataloging conversation, they weren't trying to sell to them. They actually found out that what they were with a competitor of theirs, and the feature that they loved of their competitor that was non-negotiable for them wasn't actually on this company's roadmap, and they weren't planning on building it. And so they knew then, okay, marketing, we need to exclude companies like that because they're not going to be a great fit for it. And by the way, this is the product feature that we need to tell product to start looking at if we want to capture this segment of the market. So small example, but makes a really big difference. And passing information between departments is really, really key. Then be the best, yeah, is all about expansion, scaling, trying to own a category as much as possible. And it's only possible because of everything you do in stages 1 to 4. Without that foundation, you're not really able to get to this stage. Now, competitors, they can copy your campaigns, but they can't really copy, the years of trust building that you have with your exact buyers. One example that worked really, really well for a company that we worked with, they created a video podcast called This Construction is Hard podcast. And that ended up becoming a pillar piece of content across social guides, ABM campaigns. And within 18 months of starting it, 70% of their pipeline was marketing sourced. And previously, most of it was coming from sales. But beyond that, they now became recognized thought leaders in their space. And they also became cited in industry publications. Speaking about the pains that their ICP were really having and tying it to their solution, they became a really well-known voice in the industry. And that's something that's really, really difficult for the competitors to replace. So there's a lot of different ways that you can get to this stage to build a compounding advantage. Community is another great way of doing that. But you've got to find what is that thing that's going to keep compounding for you, for your business, so your competition can't catch up. So how does it all connect? Well, these are really all the different steps and stages. You generally want to do steps 1 to 3 to shape demand with future buyers and capture in-market buyers here. With steps 4 and 5, you might want to take a screenshot of that, but it's basically, again, the steps and sequence broken down in order that we recommend tackling them. And this is split into what you need to do to reach future buyers versus what you need to do to capture in-market buyers. And one feeds the other and tends to make capturing more efficient. People ask, well, where should I start with all of this? You can't just change what you're doing overnight as an organization. Our advice is generally launch this approach with one segment, one product or service, allocate 10 to 15% of time and budget to it. If you go ahead and implement it, also give yourself enough time to do this. The ICP alignment and cataloging is probably going to take you 6 to 8 weeks. You can hopefully get some insights faster than that, but that's the reality. And just make sure you give yourself enough time to do that foundational work as much as you can, because it's really going to make an impact on the downstream work that you do and the results that you have. Race through those last couple of slides, just looking at the time. Hopefully, we've still got some people with us, Glenn. But that's really what our 5Bs framework looks like. If people want to find out more about it, I think we're sharing one of our 5Bs framework resources, which also links out to some of our best episodes that explains each section in more detail and has templates and that kind of thing along with it too.
Awesome. Thank you, George. That was fantastic. We appreciate you walking us through all of that. What stood out most was how you framed demand gen from a collection of, tactics into this 5-stage system, and how each stage builds onto the next. Really highlights why so many teams feel, busy amongst all the tactics, and sometimes they don't really see the impact of everything if they're doing things kind of disjointed everywhere, right? And I think the biggest takeaway for a lot of us here is, yeah, it's not about just doing more. It's about doing things in the right order and getting really specific with your ICP and your entry points, building that trust, making sure that you have that always on presence and awareness. And also, lastly, aligning marketing, sales, and customer success together. During your presentation, we had a few questions come in from the audience. So we're just going to take a couple of minutes to jump into those. To start off, you mentioned that only a small percentage of the market is actually in market at any given time, while the majority are future buyers. So, how should teams think about balancing demand creation versus demand capture, especially when leadership is pushing for more short-term results?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first of all, you can't abandon the demand capture work, right? There's buyers who are out there and they're actively looking, shop around, looking for solutions. And I think that's what most companies go out there and try and tap into immediately. And that's what you should be doing. But there will hit a point of diminishing returns where, quite frankly, you can't scale it past a certain point, very likely because the other competition there can probably pay more to acquire a customer than you, or maybe their brand is stronger than you. And so people are more likely to go to them. And if there's a lot of performance marketers here, we often feel that, like when we're out there in platforms like Google Ads, where we have initial success and it just doesn't scale. And so we need to have a realistic conversation with leadership about, there's only a certain portion of this market that are here and actually looking to buy right now. But if we just think about how we as an organization buy things, there's a lot of stuff that we are not in market for right now. Think of all the different services, all the different products and stuff that we buy as an organization. We're not breaking our contracts right now. So we're not all in market. So what do we need to do? Well, the research shows that the way people make decisions is they make a short list based on which brands they recognize, know, like, and trust. And so then marketing's job also becomes trying to get on that short list. And that's by making sure that people associate the pains that they're experiencing with your brand. So when they come into market, they're ready to buy from you. So again, you can't ignore demand capture. Shaping that future demand, that brand, whatever it is you want to call it, is absolutely important. And some tactics that we've seen actually work quite well for leadership is, again, getting them to think about how they make their own buying decisions. There's a whole reason we have a procurement team if your organization is big enough to have that. And often even playing back customer interviews of that CEO's favorite customer and asking them, why did you choose us over the competition and what did your buying journey look like? And they'll probably describe a whole lot of things that reflect what a real buying journey looks like. And the CEO can often be, or leadership can be, more receptive to that because they see just that one person that they trust.
Got it. Yeah, thank you so much for the answer. Cool. Harini asks, now that there are Claude skills and agents that can do most B2B marketing tasks and strategies at a good enough level, what skill or knowledge do you think a marketer should bet on and get good at to kind of AI proof their career?
Mm. So we touched on cataloging and we said that is the job of a salesperson. But I think whether it's marketing or sales, what we really need to do is be the conduit between the market and what is important to them, and finding out on a per account basis, like their timelines, who they use, what they like, what they don't like, finding out all that information, and then product and marketing, basically, like our business. Whoever has the best like fire hose of information between them and And the business, the market and the business, I think will be the ones who will be like the most useful, because that becomes like your competitive advantage, because no one is sharing. If they don't like a vendor, sure, you have G2 or whatever. But in the moment, no one is sharing publicly if they're really not liking working with an existing vendor. No one is sharing publicly when their contract dates end. So being able to work with sales and find ways to help gather that information about your market so you can circle back to them and operate on your buyer's timeline, not yours, not what suits your company, but your buyer's timeline, I think they'll be the really powerful marketers, because that's, I think, a more accurate reflection of how the market works. We'd keep trying to push people through a funnel, try and force people to buy in our timeline. They just don't do that. That's not how buyers operate. So if a lot of marketers' tasks kind of end up being automated, like content creation, all that kind of stuff, it's the inputs that become really super valuable. And so, yeah, working with sales to really gather those inputs and feed them into whatever machine it is that you have in your organization, I think that's where the value is.
Yeah, I think it's gathering all of those inputs and then figuring out which strategy to execute on to meet that timely um to be as timely as possible whenever your buyer does show up, right? You want to be there and fill up that awareness that you were talking about. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, marketers still have to do that strategy piece, I think. I don't think AI is there yet. You're going to get a lot of data from the market, from our different tools that we have, but someone still has to ingest that and say, okay, based on all that information, I think that, these are the markets that we should really try and penetrate. And strategically,
yeah,
this is the best way to position ourselves.
yeah. Rowanak asks, how much time do we give a tactic to decide before it is working or not? Because sometimes I feel we don't know it's working until quite later, and sometimes we stop those channels or tactics because we didn't see initial traction.
I think it should be long, at least long enough in a B2B context, like for like 1.5 sales cycles, right? So if you're trying a new tactic, tactics will only work if it will only appear to work if it happens to catch someone at the exact right time when they're in market looking to buy. But the reality is, you need to do that thing long enough for a greater pool of the market to have seen that tactic, to have seen that thing, and then have seen like the downstream effects of that. So, for example, okay, maybe that tactic is events. You might happen to attract one or two people to your events that are actually actively shopping around and looking for an existing vendor. Fantastic. But if you do that once, that's all you'll ever see. If you keep doing those events again and again, and you get some of those same people coming back, will they start to know your brand? They know, like, and trust you in your CRM. They're registered as people who go to those events. And over time, you're going to start to see more and more of those people become your customers. But if you just did that once as a flash in the pan, it's not going to happen. So, with this like demand generation approach, more holistic approach, people ask, how long does it take to work? You need to be doing it for at least 1.5 to 2 sales cycles to really see the full impact.
Got it. Yeah, thank you for sharing. And then we also have the last question from Adita. How much is Reddit, YouTube, LinkedIn truly helpful in distribution today? Are they supplementary or more important than others?
I'm more of a lurker than a contributor to Reddit, to be honest. I would say YouTube has been really big for us in terms of building depth with audiences. LinkedIn has been a very key point of discoverability for us, and more people are using LinkedIn. What I do like about LinkedIn, not just for marketers marketing to marketers, but for other industries too, is the context of LinkedIn is much more business focused. So people tend to be more receptive to educational information, especially as it relates to their work or their job, probably much more so than if they were, browsing on a Facebook or Instagram or whatever it might be. So we find LinkedIn works really well across a range of industries as a point of discoverability, and YouTube has been phenomenal as a touch point for people to go deeper with us. To I think that video element builds a lot of trust as well. But also the way that we do our content is every week we record the B2B Playbook. That episode becomes a YouTube video, a podcast, an extended article, and some shorts and some LinkedIn posts. And then what we do is we then compile that into like a mega article. And Google lately has just been loving it. Like our SEO is going really, really well for us the last 6 to 12 months. Um, Maybe because it has all those different authority signals stacked on top of each other.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much. Really quickly, I think Justin Thomas from the audience didn't quite capture the whole answer when we asked about, the Claude Skills agents and what should a marketer be good at to AI proof their career. If there was like just like a 1, 2 sentence summary of what you shared, I think Justin and a couple of people would like to know. Just to let everybody know, we have this recorded as well. So if you wanted to play back that answer, we'll have that available via email. But George, if you wanted to just summarize it into a bullet point or two, I think some people in the audience would love that as well.
Yeah, definitely. It would probably be work with sales to help facilitate conversations with the real humans. And once you have all those insights from those real humans, I still think that marketers are going to play a key role in deciding the strategy that comes from those insights. I think it like B2B, any organization, someone has to make the decision. People want to put a face, a name to that person to say, well done if it went well, or also to blame if it doesn't go so well. So I think that strategic lens will be very important.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Well, amazing session today, George. You covered a ton, and more importantly, you gave everybody that clear system to really think about demand gen differently. Uh, Again, quick note to everybody, we'll be sharing the recording as well as the slides afterwards, so keep an eye out for that email. And before you wrap up, George, if people want to follow your work or dive deeper into that framework, what's the best place to connect with you? Is it through B2B Playbook? Is it through your LinkedIn, uh, or your email? Feel free to share.
Yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, George Coudounaris, or if the spelling of that is too hard, head to the b2bplaybook.com and yeah, you'll be able to connect with me there.
Cool. And we'll include those links in the recap email as well as the YouTube description once this goes live. For anyone here looking to turn their demand gen into a more structured pipeline driving system, feel free to connect with George. You can also reach out to us at tripledart.com. George, thank you again for joining us today. We really appreciate you being on this episode of Coach Right Triple Dart.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really enjoyed it. Cheers, Glenn. And thank you everyone for the questions and for sticking around to the end.
Cheers, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye. Thanks, George.
Thanks, Glenn.